Hey everyone, today I wanted to talk about the top 10 best franchises on the NES. So in order to qualify, they had to have at least 2 games released on the NES, and they had to leave an impact on that console. Let me know your favorite NES franchises down in the comments, because I probably missed some of your favorites, but these are mine. If you enjoy retro gaming, top 10 videos, reviews, all that good stuff, please remember to like, subscribe, turn notifications to all so you don't miss the next video. You can also hype the video, it helps out a ton. Now let's get into it. Alright, so the first franchise that I wanted to talk about is Adventure Island. The original is pretty bare bones, I gotta admit. It's based on the original Wonder Boy, which was on the TurboGrafx as well as the Master System, but they kind of brought it across to the NES, they changed it to Adventure Island, which kind of became its own franchise. And I really enjoyed the Adventure Island series on the NES. This was one of my favorite series back when I was a kid. I know, like, today, it's not a series that I would, like, go back and play all that much, to be completely honest, but as a kid, I absolutely loved it, especially Adventure Islands 2 and 3. I had 2 when I was very young, and I remember lending it to one of my mom's friends' kids, and they just never brought it back for whatever reason, but I loved this game. I loved dinosaurs so much as a kid. I mean, I still do as an adult, let's be real. I loved how you had all these different dinosaurs, and they all had their own little abilities and perks, and it was just so cool, and it was such a straightforward game. There's nothing very complicated about it. It was simple, but a great action platformer. I love the overworld map, how you're going from like place to place across the different islands and all that, and the boss fights were really well done. I just really enjoyed the atmosphere and the gameplay. So yeah, that is why I wanted to mention the Adventure Island games. Not very many people have played Adventure Island 3. I think it came out pretty late on the NES when people were already moving over to the Super NES, but Adventure Island 3 is just as good, if not maybe even a little better than Adventure Island 2. But yeah, check these games out if you haven't yet. They're all absolutely amazing. Next up is the series of which the first game I ever played is a part of, and that is the Double Dragon series. I love the Double Dragon games. I've been playing Double Dragon games since I was like 4 years old. I even loved Double Dragon. I think it was called Revive or Rebirth or something like that, and it was really good. It just came out like a few years ago. I know they did like a brand new one, and it looked pretty bad. I never played that one yet, but the first game I ever played was Double Dragon 2 on the NES, and it's like a 2-player co-op beat 'em up. It's kind of like the godfather of multiplayer beat 'em ups, especially in the arcade. Like, even the original Double Dragon was multiplayer in the arcade. The Master System version of Double Dragon 1 was a multiplayer game as well, but the original Double Dragon on the NES, it's kind of its own thing. It's not a bad game at all. In fact, it's an amazing game, but it's not like what you would expect if you had played the arcade game and then came home and played it on the NES, because it's single player, other than there's like a tournament fighter mode where it's just like tries to be a fighting game, but it's like 1v1 and it just still controls like a beat 'em up. It was pretty cool. I would play it every now and then just to beat the crap out of my sister in it when I was a kid. But the main game is a single player affair. I don't know if they just couldn't get 2 players to work properly on the NES when this one came out. But as you gain points by beating dudes up and beating levels and all that, you're actually leveling up your character and you get access to new moves and abilities. It was a really good concept because this was before nowadays where everything has JRPG elements. Back then, almost nothing had JRPG elements. So it was kind of cool to have RPG elements in a beat 'em up game, especially like one of the first, if not the first beat 'em ups on the NES. The stages are iconic, especially in Double Dragon 2, including that shitty one where you're in that like haunted mansion thing and the platforms are just disappearing while you're trying to jump on them. That part is a nightmare. Pretty much always get defeated there and cannot get past it. I've only beat Double Dragon 2 probably like once or twice in my entire life, but it is a great multiplayer game. Double Dragon 3, oh my god, that game is impossible. The furthest I've got is to the end of the first stage. I always joke with my best bud Fates that if you can make it past the dojo, it's all post-game from then on, because holy shit, the difficulty just spikes immediately. In fact, even in the dojo, it's so hard, man. It's like the opening screen of the game, you're just getting your ass beat. But you get outside and it's even more difficult. It's still an amazing game. It's just so incredibly difficult. There's a lot of depth to the third one. There's different characters you can play as and all that stuff. But I gotta be honest with you, I've never gotten anywhere close to beating that on the NES. But the Double Dragon games on the NES are absolutely iconic. Definitely check them out, especially the first two. If you're into really challenging games, maybe check out the third one, but bring a friend with you if you're gonna. Next up, everybody knows this series, the Super Mario Bros. Series. I'm not the biggest Mario fan, gotta be honest, but not even I can deny how iconic the Super Mario Bros. Games were on the NES and how important and pivotal they are to video games in general, especially platformers. The original Super Mario Bros. Is probably my favorite of the three on the NES. I just love kind of the simplistic stages. I love how fast it is. I feel like some of the other ones are a little bit more slow, whereas the original on the NES, you can get going at a pretty fair clip, let's say. And I just like the stage designs. There's such a variety in stages too. You've got like your kind of brick and mortar stages where you're just outside and you're on like the brown brick roads and doing some platforming on that. Of course, you've got your underground stages, which are pretty cool. But the ones I always liked were like when you're on like the mushrooms and you jump on one part and the other part goes up and you have to kind of make your way across. There's also like the parts where you're running across the bridge and there's the flying fish attacking you. There's just such a great amount of variety in this game, and it's such an early NES game that I was always very like impressed and kind of in awe at the different types of stages they have. Heck, the underwater stage, like it's crazy to me that they put a swimming underwater mechanic in a basic bitch platformer. I think it was absolutely ahead of its time, and the controls were fairly tight, especially for early NES games, and I think that's why it's such an iconic game to this very day. And then of course you've got Super Mario Bros. 2, which as we all know now was essentially Doki Doki Panic in Japan, and they just kind of reskinned it, tweaked a few features, and changed it to Super Mario Bros. 3 here in the West. But I gotta say, I really enjoyed this one as well. All the characters are different in this one, which was something I really appreciated. This was the one game where everyone wanted to play as the girl because Princess Peach would like use her dress to glide across the stage. I was always either Princess Peach or Luigi because he kind of had like that hover down when he jumped. The ending is fairly memorable for being that one where it was like it was all just a dream the whole time, and that kind of sucked. But the game in and of itself is very unique and very well done. It's kind of nice to have something very different from what the first game was. I can't believe I didn't mention this in my video where I talked about Black Sheep sequels on the NES. I'm planning on doing a follow-up video to that, so if you know of any other Black Sheep sequels on the NES, be sure to mention those in the comments as well, and I might add them to that video. This was a great game. I loved, like, instead of jumping on the monsters here, you had to pick up vegetables and chuck them at them. You had the POW box that would knock out everything on screen. You had different power-ups, and you could take off on a rocket. There was so many little features in this game that was just, it was really cool, and it was very unique, especially for the Mario series. And then, of course, everyone's favorite, Super Mario Bros. 3. This one's not really my favorite by any means. Probably my least favorite of the three, to be completely honest, but I have fond memories playing this one with my cousin. Me and her would get to the very end, and I just remember like the flame bridge you'd have to kind of like walk across, and then that hand would come and grab you and pull you down into the stages. It was really well done. Again, the stage variety is really good in this one. A very memorable stage again would be like the giant stage where everything's gigantic. I thought that was pretty freaking cool when I was a kid. The worst stage in the entire game, and this is the stage that makes me absolutely hate this game sometimes, is the freaking pipes one, where it's just like random pipes all over the place. You have to like guess which pipe is going to lead you where, and half the time it drops you down further than you were originally, and you got to try and make your way to the top by just guessing these pipes. That level sucks, man. But overall, the Super Mario Bros. Series is absolutely an iconic franchise on the NES. Now, one that's maybe not as iconic, but is an absolute staple to myself and my wife, is the Star Tropics series. This is a series that never actually made it off the NES. The first game, Star Tropics, is about a baseball player from the United States whose uncle, Dr. Jones, goes missing in the tropics, of course. The Maricola Islands or something like that. And you have to go from island to island. It kind of functions like a JRPG with the overworld and the towns how you get to talk to all the townspeople, but then you go into the levels and it's kind of like if Zelda was on like a grid and had some platforming elements. The game is really, really well done. I love how the dungeons encourage exploration and trying out new things, and then the puzzles aren't too difficult either. I'm someone who's not a big fan of puzzles, so the simplicity of the puzzles that all just kind of like reveal themselves as you jump around and try new things and try to explore new areas is something that appeals to me. The boss fights are fairly intense in this game, and it feels so good to beat them. And then its sequel, Zoda's Revenge, again, it's got that top-down look. Instead of island hopping on the hunt for your uncle, this time you are going throughout time collecting these items. It turns out that the main villain from the first game is kind of messing with the timeline of Earth, and it's up to you to go to all these different memorable time periods and save them from the baddies that have attacked there. And then of course, yeah, you get these items. They look like Tetris pieces. I think they're tetrads or something like that. And once you collect them all, you can go to kind of the final stages and face off against Zoda and his goons. It's just a really good game. I think prefer the original personally because you're locked to that grid. It made the platforming a lot more manageable, whereas with the second one, it's a lot more free-flowing, which is nice when you're doing battle in like an open area that's all grass. But when you're trying to platform over like water or lava, you're not kind of locked to that grid anymore, so you're gonna overjump or underjump quite a bit, and it made it very difficult for someone like me who was used to Star Tropics. But yeah, if you haven't played the Star Tropics games on the NES, definitely check them out, especially the first one. It will not do you wrong. Next up is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series. The first game starts off a bit rocky. It's not a terrible game, it's just incredibly difficult. I love the soundtrack in it, I'll give it that much, and it's got some iconic levels, even if it's for all the wrong reasons, like the dam level where you have to disable all the bombs before the timer runs out while managing the different like electric barriers and electric seaweed, as well as seaweed that'll just straight up grab your turtle and pull them under, immediately losing a turtle in just one false move. That shit was so frustrating. The boss fights were super fun, despite some of them being a little cheap. It was kind of cool to just move around in the Turtles version of New York. And then, of course, the one everybody played and loved was TMNT 2, the arcade game. This was a multiplayer beat-em-up masterpiece on the NES. This was the game that you would play with your friends all weekend long. It had so many great stages. There's a variety of different foot soldiers. Every different colored foot soldier had its own weapons and abilities that you had to kind of manage and figure out your way to deal with. The boss fights were very well done. The music was spot on. Turtle Mania was at its peak when TMNT 2, the arcade game, came out on the NES, and they really did a good job of porting the arcade game to the home console. They added extra stages to it. It was just one of the best beat 'em up experiences on the NES. It might be the best one on the NES, to be completely honest. And then they came out with TMNT 3, the Manhattan Project, which is just as good, if not maybe better than TMNT 2, the arcade game. It added some more depth to the amount of abilities you could do as the Turtles. You had 2 finishing moves. You had to manage your points as well, because this game was very cheap when it came to lives. This is a game that I think I've only beaten 1 or twice. It's quite a bit more difficult than TMNT 2, the arcade game, because of the lack of lives. But this was a very, very good game as well. Kind of goes under a lot of people's radars, so definitely check this one out if you haven't yet. After TMNT is another iconic franchise on the NES, and I'm talking about the Contra series. Starting with the original Contra, this is the pinnacle of the run and gun genre. The granddaddy of them all. This is kind of what all those games in that genre were looking up to and trying to become, and it just nailed it so well on the first attempt on the NES. I would say easily the NES version is better than the arcade version, which isn't something you can always say. The enemy designs and kind of the stage designs are absolutely insane. The difficulty is crazy, but of course this game had the infamous Konami code that gave you 30 lives. This was a great co-op game, but also a great co-op game if you wanted to get pissed off at your friends for jumping too fast on some of the levels, because if they touched the bottom of the screen, they'd immediately lose a life. It was very frustrating if you weren't properly synchronized with your friend. This is an amazing game. It just makes you feel like Rambo, like Schwarzenegger. You just feel like you're in an action action movie, and you're going up against all these other commandos, and then of course the aliens. The boss and alien designs are just absolutely fantastic. They look so creepy. They're modeled obviously after like the xenomorphs from the Alien series, but they kind of have their own twist to them as well. They're very, very well done. And then of course the sequel, Super C, is just as good, again, if not better. It's really hard to choose between the two of them. I feel like Super C kind of tweaked up everything a little bit better. Something like the spread shot, which is probably the best weapon in the entire franchise, was pretty randomized on the original, whereas in Super C, it kind of becomes what we now would consider the spread shot, where it's like that even spread of firepower covering a big portion of the screen. Both versions of the spread shot are amazing, but it really kind of dialed it in with the second one. The second one is quite a bit more difficult, I must say. I've only beaten this one once, and it was with my good friend Fates live on stream. But let's move on to the next series. These next ones are like some of my favorite games of all time, and this one is the Ninja Gaiden trilogy. These games were amazing. Again, very, very difficult, but everything was back then, so you can't even blame it. Probably the only downside of the first Ninja Gaiden was if you get to the final boss and you lose all your lives, you go back like a stage and a half, it seems like, and that was punishing as hell. But overall, I mean, the storyline in these games, this was the first game that introduced cutscenes. They called it Tecmo Theater back in the day. Fun fact, the guy who made the cutscenes and came up with the whole concept was actually the guy that went on to help work on games like Chrono Trigger and kind of headlined the development of Chrono Cross later on. This guy is one of the most underrated game developers of all time. He was way ahead of his time with the Ninja Gaiden series. So like I said, the original game tells probably the best story in the franchise, and the stage design, the controls were super tight. I think that's what made this game work so well, despite its difficulty, was every time you would take a hit or get defeated, it was kind of your fault, right? The stage design was difficult, but it never felt like it was cheating, if you will, right? Obviously, there were some things like infinitely respawning enemies, depending on what part of the screen you would make it to. You really gotta push forward, because if you're not pushing the screen, the enemies are just gonna keep coming and coming. And then Ninja Gaiden 2, this was actually the first one I played in the series. I had this one when I was a kid and absolutely loved it so much. You have to realize back in the 90s, ninjas were on top of the world. Everyone and their dog wanted to be a ninja back then. And this game was just so badass. The enemy designs were so cool. You had like those Jason mask dudes on the train. The game was just so high action. And then you get to that bullshit stage where the wind is changing on you and you have to do all this platforming and time your jumps to the wind. Again, they absolutely nailed it with the cutscenes and the story in this one. I still think I prefer the story in the first game, but overall, level-wise, gameplay-wise, this second one is definitely the best of the bunch. And then Ninja Gaiden 3 came out, and unfortunately here in the West, because of rentals and all that, a lot of Japanese developers made the games a lot more difficult so that you would have to buy the game and you couldn't just beat it by renting it. They didn't want rentals to cut into their sales, so they made a lot of games a lot more difficult here in the West. So if you do want to play Ninja Gaiden 3, I recommend just getting like an English patch of the Japanese version of the game, but heck, you can give it a whirl in the original as well. All the other ones, you have infinite continues, so even if you lose all your lives, you're always going to just start back at the latest level, and you're never going to run out of continues. But Ninja Gaiden 3, you do have a small amount of continues, so it's very difficult to get very far in this game. I've only beaten this one, I think, once, and when I did, it was a English translated version of the Japanese game. A really good game. The story isn't quite as good as the first two. The stage design is good. It is really good. It's just very, very difficult. I like that you get the sword upgrade. It makes the sword even more badass than it already was. And all the ninjutsu and abilities are still there and just as good, if not better than ever. But I just felt like the stage design wasn't quite as good as the first two, and the story wasn't anywhere near as good as the first two. I know most people don't play action platformers for the story, but it's a nice touch. All right, now we're getting into like my top 3 franchises of all time, let alone on the NES, starting with Castlevania. Castlevania got 3 games on the NES, unless you count Kid Dracula, which was released on the Famicom, which would make it 4. These games are so damn good. They take everything you love about like the horror genre, the horror movies, the Universal monster movies, and inject them into an action platformer on the NES that is very distinct. You explore Dracula's castle, and there's like a delay when he's whipping. It makes it seem more realistic. It raises the tension, right? If you're gonna whip your whip, you have to load it up and then send it out. That's how it is in this game. If you play this game enough, you're gonna get used to that. You're gonna get used to what I call the jump whip, where you jump and you whip at a certain point and you're gonna hit anything, and that's the best way to defeat pretty much anything in these games. You're also gonna get used to the flying Medusa head patterns. When I ever see people new to the Castlevania games, they are always getting absolutely demolished by these infinitely respawning flying Medusa heads. Once you get used to them, they're super easy to avoid. You'll never hit another one again, but very, very difficult until you kind of mastered that. I love the design of Dracula's castle. It's really, really well done. The boss fights are really good as well. You get to face off against Death, who's incredibly difficult. And then, of course, the Cookie Monster himself, Dracula, at the end of the game. The first phase fight, I feel, is very iconic. The second phase against the Cookie Monster is memeable as hell, and it's just a really, really good game with a great soundtrack, great gameplay, and great stage design. And then you've got Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. Again, this one made my Black Sheep sequels on the NES video, so check that out if you haven't yet. A lot of people didn't like this one back in the day, but it is honestly one of my favorites in the series. This is what helped create what we now call the Metroidvania style of game. You're roaming the countryside, collecting the body parts of Dracula to resurrect him and defeat him once and for all. So you're going from town to town, going to all these different mansions to collect the parts of Dracula. There's not a lot of boss fights in this one, which is kind of weird, but I love the exploration. I love checking out these different towns. I love the countryside. It's not like a whole lot of variety like some of the other franchises in this video, but it's still really, really well done, and you feel like you're actually adventuring across the world of Castlevania, and this is pretty much the only game in the series where you're really doing that, because it's the only one where you're outside of castles and mansions for most of the game. And then, of course, Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse. This game allows you to play as multiple different characters depending on the different routes you take through the castle. There's a ton of replay value to this game because, like I said, there's a ton of different routes through the castle, some of them very, very difficult. This is the first appearance of the now famous Alucard, Dracula's son, and if you go his route, you are a glutton for punishment because it is very, very difficult. You have to like ration your hearts so that you can fly across as Alucard in his bat form to get through the later parts of that route through Dracula's castle. I do like the multiple routes, don't get me wrong, but yeah, if you make a wrong turn here, you're gonna have a heck of a time. I love the characters. I love their different abilities, like Grant the Nasty can climb up walls. All your iconic boss fights are here. The game looks better than ever. The final showdown with Dracula is one of the best in the series. If you like classic Castlevania, this is one of the best ones of all time. So yeah, the Castlevania series, absolutely iconic franchise on the NES. And now, my second favorite franchise on the NES is the Mega Man series. This series probably has the most amount of games released on the NES out of any series ever, I would think. You've got Mega Man 1 through 6, and they are all very, very good games. Mega Man 1 is probably like the least of the bunch, but they were kind of finding their footing still with that one. And then every game seemed to have like added something to the formula other than maybe like Mega Man 5, which is another one I'm not too big on. But Mega Man 2 added the items that allow you to kind of create platforms to get past certain areas. And it had probably some of the best robot masters in the series, like Metal Man and Crash Man. A lot of the stages across this series are just absolutely iconic. The music is top freaking tier. Mega Man 3 added this slide and robot masters like Snake Man, who's another one of my favorites. And then Mega Man 4 added what we now know as the Mega Buster, which is kind of like the charge shot. It's got some kickback if I remember correctly, or maybe that was just the Game Boy version. Let me know down in the comments. It's been a while since I played Mega Man 4 on the NES. And then Mega Man 5, like I said, didn't really add too much. And then Mega Man 6 added like the power adapter and the jet adapter, where you would actually like equip Rush to your body, and then depending on what style you were going for, you would either get all jacked and bulky, and then you could like punch holes through walls and deal tons of damage to enemies, or you would get a little jetpack that would allow you to fly temporarily until you would land and recharge your jet propulsion. This game was the first one in the series that allowed for multiple routes through the stages, and if you'd find the alternate route using either like the jet propulsion or the power adapter, then you would get access to different items. You would get Beat, who is the bird that'll go around and hit enemies for you. You'll get extra lives. There's just a ton of extra stuff you can get in this game by finding the alternate routes. The Robot Masters to me in 6 are also some of my favorites. You've got Tomahawk Man, you've got Plant Man. I just love the levels in this. Mega Man 6 is probably my favorite in the series. Check out my top 10 Mega Man games video too if you haven't yet. But yeah, the Mega Man franchise, absolutely iconic and at home on the NES. Now, for my favorite franchise on the NES, it has to be Dragon Warrior. If you can't tell from what I've got going on here in the background, the Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest franchise is my favorite series of all time, and they had 4 games on the NES. The original Dragon Warrior is the granddaddy of JRPGs, and I absolutely loved this game as a kid. I didn't even know how to read at the time. I just knew that if I kept exploring this great world and beating up monsters, I would be able to see the designs of new monsters, and that's honestly what kept me going in this game. I just wanted to keep seeing new monsters because I thought the monsters looked so freaking cool. And then Dragon Warrior 2 comes out. The world is 4 to 5 times larger, and it's a big world to explore. The game kind of falls off the rails a little bit once you get the ship. The game opens up big time, and there's a fairly big lack of direction once you get that ship. But the developers themselves said that they didn't really test the game after getting the ship because they had to make the release deadline. So completely understandable why the difficulty spikes after that point. But there's still some iconic moments in this game that get referenced in a lot of later games. It was kind of the first JRPG to involve party members, so they were kind of breaking ground here. A lot of the mistakes can be forgiven because of this. And then they went on to make a masterpiece in Dragon Warrior 3. This game, you create your own party and you go on a quest to avenge your father Ortega, who fell at the hands of the archfiend Baramos. This game, you're collecting all the orbs to give you access to Baramos's island, and then you defeat Baramos. There's this huge twist that I'm not going to spoil here. The storytelling in and of itself isn't the best, but the journey and the way you level up with like all the different job classes is just absolutely iconic and is one of the best, especially on the NES. I'd say this is easily the best implementation of job classes on the NES. And then Dragon Warrior 4, absolute masterpiece. Still to this day, one of my top 3 games of all time. This one tells the story of multiple different characters, and then they all come together in the final chapter to take on the big bad. It just does such a good job of telling each character's stories and allowing you to get to know all the characters before they join your party at the end of the game. So you kind of know all of their intentions. You know what drives each of these characters and why they're all fighting for a common goal at the end of the game. This game has probably one of the best casted characters of all time. Torneko Taloon and Alina and Kyril are my personal favorites, but they're all honestly absolutely phenomenal. This is easily, in my opinion, the best game on the NES, and the Dragon Warrior franchise is definitely the most iconic to me on the NES. So yeah, let me know down in the comments, what are some other gigantic franchises on the NES that I missed here in this video? Let me know what you think of the franchises that I did mention. What are your favorites? Tell me your top 3 or 4 favorite franchises on the NES. And if you enjoyed the video, again, please remember to like, subscribe, turn notifications to all. If you want to help out even more, be sure to hype the video if you're on mobile. It pushes my videos up the search results and just helps out a ton. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.